wrongful death lawsuit is a lawsuit that is filed by the surviving family members to seek compensation for the loss of their loved one, either a spouse or a child or a parent. If you believe that somebody has died through the negligence of someone else, you have the right as a family member of that deceased person to obtain those medical records. It is a very simple process. You either go to the hospital or the doctor's office, sign a piece of paper that attests or states that you are the family member of the deceased person. And under the law, they have the obligation within a certain period of time to turn over those records to you. Once you have those medical records, those records can be reviewed and investigated to see if a cause of action may exist. A wrongful death case does not require that an autopsy be performed. An autopsy, if not performed within the first few days of a person's death, often is never performed. That does not preclude a person from pursuing a wrongful death case. We can use medical records, we can use experts and expert testimony to establish the cause of a person's death, and so long as we can connect that to a person's negligence, you can pursue a wrongful death case with or without an autopsy. In Illinois, the statute provides that any heirs of the deceased person can recover, but it really depends on who is living at the time of the death of the person. For example, if an individual is married at the time of his or her death, the surviving spouse and their children can recover in a wrongful death case. If a person is not married and does not have children, the parents and the brothers and sisters of the deceased person can have a claim. So it really depends on when the person dies and what their status is at the time of their death. In a wrongful death case, the heirs, or the people who survive the deceased person, do not necessarily divide the money equally. It depends on who is surviving at the time. Most of the time, family members will agree about how the money is going to be divided. But if there is not an agreement, the law requires a judge to hold a hearing and have all the heirs come to court and testify to establish that they had a relationship with the decedent and that they suffered a loss. In order to understand whether having a will impacts whether how the money will be divided, depends on the underlying injury. If a person dies instantly, let's say, through the fault of someone else, and the individual did not suffer any pain and suffering before their death, having a will have no effect on how that money is divided amongst the surviving heirs. And the reason for that is the Wrongful Death Act is designed to compensate those persons who are living for their loss of the deceased person. So it has nothing to do with whether you've been excluded from a will, whether a will it does not exist or does exist. It all depends on whether you can show that you've had a loss and had a relationship with the deceased person prior to their death. In a purely wrongful death lawsuit, none of the money passes through the deceased person's estate. It's not subject to any recovery by creditors of an estate. It's not subject to any claims that people may have to the estate. It is money passes separate and apart from the person's estate. If an unborn child dies or a stillbirth, and that stillbirth occurs because of the negligence of a doctor or a hospital, that falls under the category, generally speaking, of a wrongful death. And the parents can have a recovery for the loss of the unborn child, as well as any siblings that are alive at the time of the stillbirth. In Illinois, generally speaking, the law provides you with 2 years to file a negligence action for the wrongful death of a person. However, there are exceptions to that, and it is important, if you believe that you have a wrongful death case for a family member, to immediately consult with a lawyer, because there may be circumstances where that lawsuit has to be filed even before the 2-year period expires. A wrongful death case provides for compensation for the surviving family members of a decedent. And depending on who is alive at the time of that person's death will dictate who in that family can recover money. It's important to consult with an attorney to understand whether you have any rights to pursue a case for wrongful death of a relative.